Have you ever noticed that all of a sudden your sleep is erratic and you're getting worse and worse sleep problems? You're waking up tired in the morning, or you find yourself more easily stressed and triggered overall? You may be suffering from burnout, and I've been there, so we're going to talk about that. We listened to Alicia on our last episode talk about her experience from burnout, from the emotional stresses of seeing the aftermath of her hometown wildfire experience. And so go to that episode to hear her story. Today we're going to talk about burnout in just a more general and overall and how it applies to all of us, because I'm sure all of us have at one time or another experienced symptoms of burnout. And like Alicia mentioned, the more we're able to see it sooner, the better we are able to support ourselves. So how does burnout happen? Well, basically, we've got our cup of what we can handle, and it's either just a physical or emotional or spiritual where it overflows too much and too often. It can overflow and we may be triggered. It can overflow and we may be stressed. But if it's doing that regularly, or if it's just so much, it's just overflowing, then that's what leads to burnout and is very hard on our bodies physically, emotionally, and spiritually. It's not uncommon that this is the flip side or the flip slide of highly productive people or busy people, which we are known for in the United States without resting, and that can cause a lot of depletion. Because without seasons of adequate rest and refreshment for our body, mind, and spirit, we burn out. I always find it interesting in the Bible. It talks about how God created the world in 7 days, and on the seventh day he rested. It was a show like, hey, you be busy, you take a break. And I have to confess, that's always been hard for me. So let's talk about it more. So my struggle for 2025, and honestly, I was talking to my husband, like, how long have I been really struggling? And I hate to say it, it's been probably 9 months. So basically, it was a compilation in my story from my niece passing in March. And I talk about her passing in episode 88. And then also Mike and I, a few months later, had a separation due to some addictive patterns that we were working through, and it was great for us. And we talk about that together on episode 108. And so those two together was just a flood and a flood. It's kind of the concussion theory. I don't know if you guys have heard about like, hey, you get a concussion once, but we now know if you get a concussion multiple times too close, that causes much more damage. Well, that was kind of my story. Two things close, too much. And basically, before I knew it, I was very low energy, struggling sleeping, really having a hard time working and getting overstimulated so easy. It was really interesting to me. It did not feel good and I didn't like it. So let's talk about the ways and the areas where it's easy to get burned out. So really, it is our job to guard our hearts and to recognize and address the energy sucking areas. Because basically, if we're living at too full of capacity, either physically, emotionally, spiritually, energetically, time, then it just keeps our cup too full. And that was probably my first mistake. I was living at about a 95 capacity, just physically, emotionally, spiritually, all of it. My cup was rather full. There wasn't a lot of leeway, and then a dump just didn't do great things for me. So we're told to guard our hearts because it's the wellspring of life, and that's in the Bible, and I really like that. And what that reminds me of is like our heart, our spirits are like this flame, and we either add to this flame and make it burn brighter, add to it every morning, every moment we can, or we're dumping water on it. Life events kind of dump water on it. All sorts of things can dump water, but you do too much of it, and our little flame gets to be sputtering. And that's a really good example of burnout. So we're going to break it up into the 3 areas: emotionally, spiritually, physically, and how our body works. So it's very interesting emotionally that our body registers emotional pain as physical pain. They're very similar to our bodies. It feels the same. For me, anytime we're having feelings, one of the most important things to do before we try to be happy or look for the bright side is really to feel our feelings. And it's not just like yes, I'm having this feeling, is allowing our body to feel it within our body and to process it. For most of us, that's a very scary thing for us. But without that, with the constant resisting of feelings that we're having, that creates a higher emotional cup. So, or reacting doesn't actually process our feelings. We actually have to sit with them and allow them to feel it within our bodies. And so feeling our feelings is super important. And thankfully, I've had practice doing this. So I was definitely feeling my feelings of loss and sadness with Ariel's passing. And then also, with Mike and I's separation, I wasn't sure how things were going to land because I don't really believe you can change people, nor do I desire to. I can just say what isn't working for me and, be clear about that. And so there was the fear of loss and all of that because we are such great friends and I really wanted things to work out and things have worked out wonderfully and it's been pretty powerful. So really feeling our feelings and, focusing on gratitude. I don't want this to ever be at the expense of feeling our feelings. So, because there is a toxic positivity I talk about where we're being positive and we're using it to not deal with real things. So, but our brains also have a negativity bias, and that's nothing wrong with them. They were made that way. They're made to look for things that may cause danger or fear, or protect us. That's its job. And it's like a puppy. We just have to train the puppy. So focusing on gratitudes is super important. And I think for me, just all of the sadness I was feeling and all of that was a lot. So a lot to be processing. So really trying to balance that with focusing on the gratitude and using that as one of my many tools I used during that season. And also sifting the thoughts. We have to remember our thoughts aren't always true. In fact, a lot of times they're not. And our thoughts aren't always from us. In fact, a lot of times they're not. We can get thoughts from the world. We can get them if you believe in the enemy. If you believe in that, he's definitely trying to give us thoughts that are disempowering and give him an opportunity to cause us harm. And anytime we believe his lie, we're giving him a hook, giving him control into our lives. And so he's happy to give us thoughts that aren't true. And I definitely grabbed on to some of those during my grief and sadness. And that was really good to sort through those things. For example, when a 15-year-old dies, that you naturally is like, is God good? What is the purpose of this? And the truth is, I don't know. And, I was just reading in the book of Job, which is in the Bible, and he made a really good point. He's like, should I just be, thankful and grateful to God when he gives me great things and, that's easy? Or does he give both bad and good and he's still a good God? That's something to really sift through. It's easy to be like, for me, like the spoiled child, like it's all great when everything's going my way, but we have to understand that that is part of life, the good and the bad. And unfortunately, that's just how life is. It's a mixture. So sifting through our thoughts is always important. I talk a lot about this in the book, the Unravel Notebook that I have available on Amazon, which is basically a guide to help us to go from overly kind to empowered kindness. But a big part of that is sifting through our thoughts. And that is the barf notebook. And again, that process is barfing our feelings out. And that's the feeling our feelings, like barfing them out, sorting them out, and then planning it out. And really that process is really powerful to process through emotions and to empower ourselves to listen to ourselves and take steps that that we are needing to take. So one thing that's really helpful as far as our emotional overload is getting rid of spinning emotions. And for example, there are some very unproductive emotions. Unproductive emotions are those spinning ones like worry, anxiety, over-functioning or over-focusing. Like it's super easy as women to like over-focus on our weight or over-focus on something like that. Those start to spin and those are energy depleters big time. Another one is perfectionism. Talk about depleting. And we're going to talk about that in a future episode coming up. Being too busy and that sort of spinning is also emotionally, physically depleting. And those are motivated by not enoughness, our views. Or another one that's a spinning and not helpful is shame and guilt. And that's just a spinning, chronic shame and guilt, people pleasing. All of those are like these spinning toxic emotions where we need to like figure out the root and clean up the root. And that, again, that unravel notebook, and really find out what is motivating that. And sometimes it's just really habit forming, and really look into that because they deplete us hugely. Another thing that depletes us, oh boy, unprocessed trauma. Because even, if we haven't processed through trauma, it's still there. So it's in our emotional cup and it's there, and it can keep the level pretty high. I recently spent some time with some family members, and I know one of them has like not dealt with his past at all, and there was a lot of trauma. And his cup is very full. And so he was easily like snapping or cold. And you could tell that that unprocessed trauma just keeps his emotional cup really full, which doesn't feel good to him or to people around him who are getting snapped at or the cold treatment. So not helpful, but unprocessed trauma, wow, that'll keep our cup full. So what are some of the things we can do? Well, we can process our trauma. We can get rid of those repetitive spinning emotions. We can feel our feelings and focus on our gratitudes and all of that. So again, and then we can add. And how we add is energy producing emotions. One thing is add joy. Have you ever thought about like what brings you joy, and have you intentionally sought it out? That's huge, especially if you're struggling with some of the burnout symptoms I've talked about. Really figuring out what brings you joy and pursuing that. And it's not that you have to quit your job and go on a joy journey. There's ways we can add joy throughout the day as we get more in tune with joy. It could be also, we're also uniquely different as far as what adds joy. I know for me, one thing is like nature. Being in nature and just hearing the water or seeing the leaves, that adds a lot of joy. Close friendships, very close friendships add joy because I tend to be more of an omnivert. Like I'm not an introvert, I'm not an extrovert. I actually tend to get motivated more by myself as far as re-energized. And so, most people don't like necessarily bring up my energy, but the closest people do. But really just listening to what brings us joy and how can we add little bouts of joy. It could be petting our pet. It could be cooking food. It could be all sorts of things. We're so uniquely and diversely made. I love it. So that's the emotional part, which is huge because, again, our body registers emotional pain very similar to physical pain. And so that makes a lot more sense as how important it is for us to take care of, sift, clean up our emotional basements and all of that, and to leave more capacity for ourselves emotionally and more resilience. Are you feeling stuck in with love, wealth, or peace? Well, you're not alone. Often it's a subconscious belief holding you back. That's why I combined life coaching and hypnotherapy together, so you can break through what's been keeping you stuck. Life coaching helps you shift your mindset, while hypnotherapy works deep within to reprogram limiting beliefs and memories. It's fast, it's effective, typically one session of each, and I have a few openings left. Are you ready for a change? Visit livebrighter.info and book your free consultation and see if this approach is right for you. See you then. So the other area is spiritually. Connecting to God, source, and getting energy, love, and delighting in that relationship is huge for our stability, for our rest, and also following the example of God by resting. So that spiritual component, however we nurture our spiritual relationship, that is huge. So that's the spiritual component. And our body. Physical things have a toll on us, and it's very interesting because our emotional will affect our spiritual affect emotionally. We can't like separate these out, even though I've separated them out. And so for me, it was very interesting because my emotional is what started, but then it affected my physical, and then it affected my physical at a deeper level because I got my blood tested recently and my hormones plummeted. And that really explained a lot of how I was feeling because it was very depleting. So once I shifted that made a huge difference. But our body can be depleted because of how it works. Like if we have too much cortisol, Too long, burnout. If our adrenals are working too much, which is related to our cortisol, huge. Things that kind of help our energy, and I really focused on this too, is getting light in the morning and evening kind of resets our cortisol and our melatonin. That is huge. Like and I have what they call a sad lamp, and that gives me light in the morning. That kind of triggers that shift from cortisol to melatonin, and that's really helped with sleep and resetting that whole cortisol adrenal glands. And that's huge. These are some easy, simple things to do that add up over time. Regular sleep, that's very huge in renewing our bodies and minds, really getting that regular sleep, which is challenged sometimes with burnout because it's usually a stress component involved in that. But prioritizing that and having, really prioritizing that is huge. And just calming the nervous system, because in burnout, our nervous systems are not happy. So that can really be breath work. I've gotten a lot more into breath work and how our breathing can really affect our physical and emotional state. And that is very interesting and really powerful. So understanding the breath work and meditation, being able to calm our minds and relax them, is huge for our bodies to recuperate. And then giving ourselves brain food. Wow, we have to be so nice to ourselves when we are challenged with burnout or different things, and giving ourselves food that actually helps support our body and our brain is huge. But what do we crave when we're struggling with burnout? Junk food. So it's really important to be intentional about this and take care of ourselves and our brain. And like I mentioned, my hormones plummeted. And so it was really interesting because I had been trying different things and supporting myself, but not seeing a huge change. But boy, when I got my hormones shifted, I felt a ton better and got a lot more energy pretty quickly. But what's really important during a time of burnout is patience and love. I also want to say, though, if you're having some physical things, it can help to see a naturopath. They tend to understand, or a functional medicine doctor, they really understand the root cause, and they can take some lab tests and understand what's going on. And that can be super helpful. And that's actually what I had done too. But adding patience, because honestly, when you go from highly productive to not productive, Alicia talked about this too, it can be really stressful. I also, one of the gals I enjoy listening to, Laila Hormozi, she actually had an experience too this year or last year, because now it's 2026, last year where she was dealing with some things too. And it has to be super intentional to rest and take time. I wanted a magic bullet. I wanted a quick fix, and that can even create more stress. So it can change with time, and there's lessons to be learned. It's a wonderful, I wouldn't like to say wonderful, but I took it as an opportunity to listen to my body and to figure out what was more at the bottom of the cup. What were some things that were stressing me? What are some things that I needed to work on more deeply? So it was a great opportunity for me to go deeper into some things that needed some healing. And honestly, our bodies are designed to heal. If you feel like your body has rejected you or gone against you, it's usually just the opposite. It's usually our brain has not been listening to our body. Our brain has been ignoring and not being a team. And now our body is done with it. And so it's super important to really be united, body, mind, spirit, soul, all of that together to be healthy people. And really tap into love, loving ourselves, listening to ourselves, asking yourself, how can you support yourself one action or inaction? Big emphasis on inaction at a time. So it's been difficult for me during this season to have less energy and work through that. I feel probably 90% better. And like I said, it's been quite a long season for me. So hopefully you can learn something from that for your own lives. I hope, and share this with somebody else that may be struggling with that. Rate and review this would be huge to get this out to more people. And we're going to end with just a little exercise because I love putting things into practice. So I want you to start with a deep breath in. When you take your breath in, have it be a belly breath, and that means your belly is getting bigger and your shoulders aren't even moving. And then breathe out slowly. Take another deep breath in and breathe out slowly. And I want you to just check in with yourself. You can even put your hand on your heart and just open your heart to receive love from, I always like to get love from God, and just, envision a light above me and just feeding into my body and lighting my cells up and lighting my heart and just feeling that love and literally feeling it. God delights in us. He thinks we're all his favorite human. And just knowing that and appreciating that. And then appreciating yourself. That's huge. If we're not nice to ourselves or unkind or unloving, that's hugely toxic on our emotional cups. So just appreciating yourselves and your humanness. We're all human. So just appreciate yourself and appreciate you've gotten yourself this far, and you're growing a little bit at a time. And then take a deep breath in still and breathe out and ask yourself, what is something that's depleting you? And see what comes up. And then what is one thing you can take away? And what's the right next thing to support yourself? And sometimes we're in situations where we can't really, it's difficult to change the circumstance. And so radically accepting is huge. And just accepting what is very important, because anytime we're in that constant chronic resistance is very difficult. So just accepting what is. It doesn't mean you have to be okay with it. Just accepting. So go ahead and do that one thing that you can add and the one thing you can take away, and make it a great day and live brighter 1% at a time. I believe in you. Stay tuned for our next episode.